anything that you do that you want to aim at me, I don't trust it because I have a history of you're doing stuff to me that wasn't all that pleasant for me.
The Influencers Nation.
Senator Horhn, thanks so much for being a part of this today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be on this podcast with us.
Well, Ron, it's always great to be in your company, so my pleasure.
Yeah, I've appreciated your friendship over the years. You and I have had these conversations off and on over the years about, kind of the need for people to really spend more time getting to know each other across, all political persuasions, because in the absence of that, it really produces a lot of contention and a lot of real bad results in terms of political rhetoric. And I think we see that played out really across our country today.
Right. Yeah, it's where we are in America today, and it's not good. It's not healthy for our democracy. It's not healthy for our republic. And it's not healthy just for general human relations.
Yeah, and it's true across the political spectrum. I know years ago I read a book by Dr. Will Miller. He wrote a book called Refrigerator Rights. And the whole contention of the book was that we don't have meaningful relationships with people, where they can come in our home and open the refrigerator and get something out. And we just don't know people that way anymore. We're often siloed away, and we tend to have better relationships with the shows we watch and know more about what's going on those storylines than we do what's going on in our own neighborhood. And I think that's pretty indicative of what we see in the political environment nowadays. We assume the worst or the best based on whatever our political persuasion is, and the people who disagree with us aren't worthy of an opinion. Yeah. I liken it to a very troubling time. But our kind of anecdote to that is, how can we create a place where we have conversations and we get to know why people who've chosen to serve in public service believe what they do, what their story is, what their upbringing produced. All those things form who we are as individuals. And if we can know that, it's kind of like the old story of going into a Red Lobster and you want lobster, and the son names all the lobster in the tank. You don't want lobster anymore because now the lobster has a name, right? So that's kind of our effort, is how do we get people to know more about what's the backstory of our public officials?
Yeah, well, I think that mainstream media has done a lot to foment some of that. I believe that the demonization of the other side is the order of the day now, and as you say, it does not lend itself to getting to know the other side. You're driven by sound bites, and sound bites are delivered by your favorite media platform or a media entity, and you don't watch what's going on in the media on the other side. And part of it too, I think, is that with the media, what is considered the truth nowadays is relative to which side you're on, and whereas at one time I think the media sort of represented the universal truths that everybody could agree to in principle, but now my truth is what I need it to be. And as a result of that, there's a lot of false narratives out there. There's a lot of false information that gets into the mainstream, and we're at the point now where it's hard to determine what the truth is anymore.
Right. I completely agree with that. So kind of given that frame, I'm just wondering, like, give me a understanding, like, what was it like growing up? What's your story? Before public service, before any of the things that we know you to be now, being in the Senate for over 27 years, is it?
I'm in my 32nd year.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So longer. So before all of that, right? Give me a little bit of an understanding of your background.
Yeah, well, immediately prior to getting elected, I served for about 12 years in state government in appointed positions. I worked at the State Arts Commission as a program manager. Then I became the film commissioner for the state, worked to bring movies in to be filmed on location here. Brought in Mississippi Burning, Mississippi Masala, the North and South miniseries, Beth Henley show, Miss Firecracker contest, and a number of different projects. We had a good run. And then I became the executive director of the governor's office of federal programs under Governor Mavis, which is a great position, but a very miserable position because I had all this money and all this responsibility, but I couldn't blend the money to help a mother who needed childcare, who also needed transportation, who needed job training. Couldn't blend the money, and so it was a miserable existence at Fed State, but we got through it. And then I became the state tourism director, where we were trying to position Mississippi as a travel destination. And I was there right as we were ramping up the casino industry. And so that was an exciting time. But prior to that, I worked at a cultural arts coalition as executive director, and worked to help present the African American history and culture of folks to the state, and to offer it as um, a commodity for attendance, and people to be educated about their history and culture. And before that, I worked as a job developer for 16 to 21-year-olds who were out of work or in need of training. And then there was college before that. But growing up as a kid, my parents had a fairly wholesome household that they commandeered, and there were five siblings, 3 boys and 2 girls. I have an older brother, so I'm number 2 in line, and the second son. You're always trying to find your way, because you know who's in charge. The oldest brother is in charge, and then I had a sister beneath me, and so the older sister is also in charge, and I'm kind of trying to figure out, okay,
What's my role?
What's my role here? But as a child growing up, my father was involved in the labor movement pretty heavily. He was the second Black union president in the state of Mississippi. He went on to become the number 2 guy at the state AFL-CIO. He also founded a group called the A. Philip Randolph Institute. And A. Philip Randolph was his hero. If anyone knows Mr. Randolph, he was involved in the merger of the old AFL and CIO when they combined. He was the union president for the Pullman car workers, who were, up until they unionized, were very mistreated on railroad cars. They were the porters who would take care of the passengers, but often didn't have a salary, and they depended on tips to earn a living. And that wasn't fair because folks were uneven in how they tip people. And so he organized them and got them better working conditions, better pay, and better benefits. And so, and then A. Philip Randolph was the gentleman who was responsible for organizing the March on Washington that Dr. King became Dr. King.
I have a dream.
I have a dream. And so he was Dad's mentor. And he had these organizations called A. Philip Randolph Institutes that were created to deal with voter education and voter participation training for African Americans and other persons who had not been involved in the voting process heretofore. And there was a need for that because Blacks had been disenfranchised for well over 100 years. And so there's no knowledge about the voting process, how you educate yourself about who the candidates are, how you deal with getting the vote out, and so forth. And he built that organization up, and I got involved with it fairly early. And my dad is about almost 6'5" tall. I've got 2 other brothers, and they are a little bit taller than I. And I tell everybody I got this community service genes. I didn't get the height genes. So, but my interests growing up were studies. I was involved in athletics to some extent, but played sandlot football and that sort of thing. But tennis was my sport of choice, and so I did that in high school, junior high, high school, and college. and played until I was about 37 years old, and then just put my rackets down and haven't picked them up much in the last few years. But I was really more of a studious kid, loved to read, and uh, if I were to say what is the one difference maker in my life that has shaped and molded me in terms of an activity, is reading. I read voraciously when I was a young child, and I still read a lot now. But reading is the great equalizer to me. And you can go to the moon in a book.
Yeah.
You can go under the ocean in a book. You can go to a foreign land in a book, and it opens up your mind's creativity and its ability to cogitate and to um, be able to synthesize ideas into new thoughts. If there's one great equalizer for me, it's reading.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. I wasn't. I'm sure anyone who knows me knows that I wasn't, a star athlete in school. I was kind of, I was always kind of the last one picked in sports, but I love to read. And I love to, listen to public speaking. That was always, politics was interesting to me, government, history, and I agree. I think the more we learn from the past, the less likely we are to repeat it.
I was involved with student council. I from the sixth grade on, but my interest was acting. I really wanted to be where Denzel Washington is now, and so it was from that standpoint that I want to engage people, and yet here I am, 30 some odd year member of a political entity. In fact, a good friend of mine, Avery Brooks, who played Captain Sisko on um, Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. When I met him, he was doing Uncle Tom's Cabin here in Mississippi, and I was the film commissioner, as I said, and went to visit the set, and we became friends, and he predicted, "You're going to be a politician." I said, "No, I'm going to follow you in your craft and go to Hollywood." He said, "I don't see it. You're going to be a politician."
So talk to me about that transition. You wanted to get into acting. And so what led you into state government? Was it just the opportunity to be around, kind of that industry and attract more to Mississippi, or what kind of got you thinking about stepping into public service or government?
Well, being in need of a job.
It was of necessity.
It was of necessity. We when I got back, and it's really, I would say it's arts and culture that led me into politics, because my first interaction with state government was with the film commission, not as the film commissioner at that time, but wanting to be an actor. And at the time, Mississippi was shooting a lot of antebellum films, most of which I think would have accrued to Presley, that would have closed the gap. But I really think that there is a chance for Mississippi to go purple in the next 4 to 8 years. But it's going to take a lot of hard work. And part of what you were mentioning earlier is that we are so segmented and divided that uh, there seems to be a presentiment, in my opinion, on the part of the white electorate, is that they've got to sit with the herd, and right now the herd is with the Republican Party for the most part, and so there's a lot of pressure on the part of white citizens to ensure that as many of them vote Republican as possible, and then on the other side, Democrats, the Black community tends to vote Democrat. And so it's our races are determining which parties we're in, as opposed to the positions, the actual positions of the party.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about that, because you know this. I'm I'm not originally from Mississippi. I'm a transplant from California. And growing up, I mean, talking about Dr. King's speech in Washington, I Have a Dream, he actually mentioned Mississippi 4 times in that speech, right? None of them very flattering.
The state of Mississippi is so sweltering in the heat of injustice, sweltering in the people's injustice, sweltering in the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice.
That's right. And so
every hill and molehill in Mississippi.
Yeah. Yeah, 4 times.
Yeah.
And, so looking at that, I came to Mississippi kind of with, I think, a certain paradigm that's perpetuated throughout a lot of the country, right?
Mhm.
And when I moved here, I thought, well, I'll be here, a year, maybe a year and a half, and go back home to California. What I found is kind of what Richard Grant found, to be honest with you, in his book, Dispatches from
Pluto.
Mhm. Is that Mississippi is one of the best kept secrets, right? And, it's not the Mississippi that I'd heard about. It's certainly not the Mississippi that Dr. King mentioned in his speech. And yet, right, I see that there's this attempt to kind of continue to make race the dividing line and perpetuate this perception that Mississippi is still caught in the past. And again, that's just not the Mississippi I've come to love over the last 13 years. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, I mean, sure, I think there's a lot of work to do. I'm not saying that, racism isn't an issue. I'm just wondering if you see, kind of like I've experienced, that there's a lot of progress that's been made.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And Mississippi is not nearly the place that it once was, or that people think that it still is. Race is still a question, race and racism. Because
But I guess my question is, do you think that it's an issue because it's a politically expedient issue? Like, I mean, there's this effort sometimes to, like you say, silo people off, right? African Americans have always voted for Democrats, and this group always vote Republican. Do you think that effort is really to maintain whatever kind of political security that a party has, instead of, if we acknowledge that progress is being made and we make it like Morgan Freeman said, I don't want you to view me as a black man, I want you to view me as a man, right? And I'm not going to look at you as a white man, right? We're going to look at, like Dr. King said, the content of your character, not the color of your skin. Do you think that that's one of the realities, or do you think it's?
Well, I think that question is wrapped up with the whole idea of preservation of the status quo. And the white community is, in my opinion, very concerned about maintaining its position in society in Mississippi. They've always had control of things, whether it's the government, whether it's the economy, whether it's the state's finances, access to healthcare. It has been in that superior position for a while. And when I say superior, I mean it's been on top. And the sentiment that I see coming out of not white individuals, and not even white people collectively, it's personified in the Republican Party, is that we have to preserve the status quo. Because the sense is that if you make gains, then something is being taken from me. And I like things the way they are. I've got 98% of control. So I'm not interested in giving up anything. And I think that's part of what drives a lot of our decision makings, our policies, decisions about how and where we spend the money. And I think that's not healthy. But the other side of it is that in Mississippi, the next major hurdle that we have to overcome is trust. There's not enough trust across different demographic lines that exist, whether it's economic, whether it's racial, whether it's age. We don't trust each other. And so anything that you do that you want to aim at me, I don't trust it, because I have a history of you're doing stuff to me that wasn't all that pleasant for me. And so as a black person, I don't trust you. And then on the other side, when you see, say, black political empowerment increase, there's a lack of trust of that on the part of the white community, and folks tend to diminish or um, uh, what is the word? Uh, be less accommodating to the idea of black leadership, for example, and so because folks don't trust that leadership because they haven't seen it in action, and they may have some other innate feelings about the intelligence of blacks or their ability to lead or the ability to get things done. So we've got to build up trust in our community, in our state, to the point where it's not about your color or not about what part of the state you're from or not about where you went to school. It's about you got great ideas that some of which I might like, and I have great ideas, some of which you might like. Let's come together on it. But all too often, the rigidity of that herd mentality that happens. You know, if you're black, there's a certain place you hang out, and there's certain things you do. If you're white, certain places you go and things that you do, and there's no cross fertilization. We need some fertilization, cross fertilization, to be if we're going to really make the state as great as it could be.
So how do you think that's accomplished? Because I hear what you're saying, and I agree that there needs to be more conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I mean, to me, the way I model it for my son, right, is we model it by not focusing on, you know, the color of someone's skin, right?
You know, even to the point how you describe someone. You know, well, did you see the guy the other day? No, what did he look like? Well, tell me about him. Well, he was black, and he was short, but you lead with the the skin color, as opposed. Well, he was that guy wearing that blue hat the other day, and those overalls. You know, but in Mississippi, we've been trained. I think in America, really trained to first focus on the person's color and as a way of describing them when you're talking to someone else. That's the first thing that stands out in our minds. We've got to get away from that. One thing that I saw in Mississippi years ago, about 30 years ago, in Oxford, Mississippi, Second Baptist Church and the Episcopal Church, I think it was St. Philip's in Oxford. Not sure the name of the church, but I think it was St. Philip's. Started a church swap where the members of Second Baptist would literally swap churches. Their members would go to the Episcopal Church, and the Episcopal Church members would go to Second Baptist Church, and they'd have services with folks in those respective churches. Sometimes it was with a commingling of the congregations, but sometimes it was just where you would go and Bishop Gray would be pastoring the Second Baptist Church services, and I forget the other pastor's name. He would come and deliver the sermon for St. Philip's Episcopal.
Mm-hmm.
And that cross-fertilization did a lot to bring people together in Oxford. It lasted for about 2 years, and then it went away. But those kinds of things are much needed to break down the barrier of a lack of contact. In Mississippi, we have all these this high percentage of African Americans, the highest in the country per capita. But blacks and whites in the state don't commingle as much as they need to. They might at a football game, basketball game. They might, of course, in school in many instances. But in terms of just the cross fertilization, visiting your home, visiting my home, in many instances, school is no longer as great a place for convening because folks have resegregated in a lot of ways. In certain instances, there are some certain exceptions to that, but there has been a resegregation since the 70s. Desegregation occurred, and so you're living in your own worlds, and you may in Jackson. I think there's more commingling of that because of the nature of the town. But in smaller towns, I don't think you see that quite as much.
Well, I think I agree with you in the sense that I think that the solution to it is by getting engaged.
That's right.
Right. I agree with that 100% because, if we don't, I think that kind of separation is happening not just amongst, races, but in some respects, we're seeing a separation amongst people who feel forgotten. Right. I think that was part of the appeal, in politics towards candidates that see anti-establishment versus establishment,
Right.
because people feel like they're disconnected and they feel like government doesn't care about them.
Right.
And so I think some of those things are just a natural byproduct of not getting engaged and not sitting down and having conversations, kind of like we're doing now, right? I mean, over the years, I remember I was introduced to you by our friend Jay Carney, and that relationship has grown because we've actually spent time talking.
Well, it really, I thought it was around the tornado that hit Columbia.
Yeah, but our first interaction that it was, but I was connected to you because of
Jay.
Because of Jay.
Yeah.
So, but I think people need to get their mind around the fact that you don't have to agree with somebody on every issue.
That's right.
To have a relationship and a friendship with somebody.
And that a natural disaster is what really brought us together.
Yeah, interesting you should say that because you remember Dr. Jimmy Porter. He was head of the Christian Action Commission for the Baptist Convention.
Right.
And when I first started working at the Capitol representing the Pentecostal Church, he had been there so long and kind of, knew his way around. And I went over and I sat with him. And one of the stories he told was kind of similar to what you just told about the church kind of swapping.
Right.
And he said there was a disaster that one of the churches was destroyed. I think it was actually a church that was predominantly a white church, right? And he said the Baptist church down the road that was predominantly black invited them to share services with them. And while they were rebuilding their building.
Exactly. Yeah.
And as a result, really strong friendships were formed because people were spending time with each other. They were sharing meals together. They were going to service together, and those relationships lasted long beyond after the building was rebuilt.
If you can put your feet under the same table with someone and break bread with them, you can generally break down a lot of.
Would you agree with? Yeah. Would you agree with me though that that's hard to do? When there's this feeling, I think on both sides of, that race is always the issue, right? Like,
it's tough. It's tough.
Just because I'm white, that means I'm automatically predisposed to institutional racism. And I think that often drives people apart because they want to avoid conflict, not because they feel that they are those things. At least that's where I see it as being the great disconnect, right? The first step is realizing
it's the herd mentality.
Yeah.
We've got too much of a herd mentality. And
that would be true on both sides.
On both sides. It's on both sides. And it's also, it's true of kids and peer pressure in high school. You hang out with your folks and you don't mess with those guys over there. And, and it's the person who dips and dabbles in all of the groups and, is able to maneuver and negotiate their way through all of those groups that I admire.
Yeah.
When I was in school, I would make a point of going and sitting with someone I didn't know in order to try to get to know them and have them get to know me. What you see, in the cafeteria is everybody's bunched up in their own little cliques.
Sure.
And that does not lend itself to understanding and being able to to communicate across different lines that are different from your particular lines, and so seeing it in social settings, the black white part of it and separation is a natural progression of cliquishness that we have, naturally as folks growing up.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, thank you for kind of sharing that. I think that as we move forward, I think particularly in politics, because it's something that people see, right? Um, when we look at, for instance, when you want to run for office, right, dealing with that issue
Right.
openly and reaching across, I'm wondering what you see as the faith community's role in reconciliation in that way. Because our politics in our country right now seem to be more focused on kind of driving the faith community out of the public square and not wanting as much engagement. We hear, a lot of efforts legislatively to kind of discourage the church from being involved and being a part of the solution. I'm wondering, how do you see the church and the faith community as its proper role in the public square?
Well, there's certainly a need for the church and religious beliefs in the public square. I don't believe that any one faith or denomination should drive the whole process, but we should have the kind of freedom and attitude that we can listen to folks who have different beliefs and different faiths that they ascribe to, and everybody's religion ought to be respected, in my opinion. When you have one particular faith that's kind of driving the process and controlling the process, I think therein lies the problem. But as it relates to the role of the church in the public square, there's a vital role for it. And I think that we need the church more involved in breaking down walls that exist between different people. And there's like the Second Baptist St. Philip's model. The church needs to be leading the way towards reconciliation. One of the things that I was disappointed by a couple of years ago when we got ready to change the flag is that I would have expected an organization like Mission Mississippi, for example, to take the lead on driving it, because they're all about reconciliation. That's one of the chief roles of Mission Mississippi. And yet, for whatever reason, they opted not to get involved in that fight. And it was a real disappointment for me, because I thought that the whole idea of reconciliation and to me, one of the biggest accomplishments of our changing the flag was it gave us a few more steps towards reconciliation. And the fact that Mission Mississippi was not there was a little disappointing, because I just thought that based on how they were formed and what their mission is, that would be something they'd be out front of.
That's interesting. I know, Nettie Winters, I think, was over Mississippi at the time.
Yes.
And, this is kind of adjacent to that subject, but I think it's not specifically with regard to the flag. But, there was an effort kind of in tandem with the flag, more nationally, to kind of move monuments and, all these things. Right. And I remember I talked with him about it because it was interesting to me. And he said, I think there was a debate over moving a statue of a Confederate soldier in
Oxford. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he was saying that his answer to it, why he wasn't, out front trying to make that happen. He said, I would rather, how much money are they spending moving the statue? Mm-hmm. And he said, I would rather spend a fraction of that money contextualizing the issue, putting up historic educational panels around it to talk about it in context and educate people, and spend the balance maybe on a scholarship program to make sure more minorities have access to getting into college or something.
Or putting up a corresponding Black monument.
Sure. So the idea being that we don't learn anything from history by erasing it.
Right.
Right. We learn from it by acknowledging it's there, contextualizing it, and then moving forward.
Right.
And that resonated with me a lot, because I think that sometimes if there's things in our history that we're not proud of, the temptation is to say, well, let's get rid of it. Let's move it to the back in some field somewhere so we don't see it, or let's melt it down instead of.
But you don't solve anything that way.
By moving it, I agree with you.
You don't solve anything.
I agree.
Contextualization is important, but balancing the story is also important.
Yeah, for instance, Richard Grant wrote another book. I'm sure you read it, called
I have not read that.
You haven't read The Deep and South of All?
Right.
So I read it, and it tells, kind of the story of Natchez in three different three different phases. One is, I think in the 60s. One is current day, and then one is back with the Prince, right? When basically he came over and he was sold at the Forks of the Road slave market in Natchez.
Right.
And
Ibrahim.
Yes. And I went there after I read the book, and I went to the location where it is, and there's this, and there's this, setup there that has panels that kind of talk about it in context, what happened there. And I thought it was really moving to be able to stand there and read about what I had read about and the history of it all. I think more of that, helping people understand what happened, helps people to get determined never to let those things repeat themselves.
Exactly. In the case of Ibrahim, if I remember the story correctly, he saved a white explorer's life
in Africa. Yes.
And 30, 40 years later,
he meets him.
This guy visits the plantation where he's a slave, and they recognize each other.
Yep.
And that's what starts the ball rolling for him getting his freedom.
Yeah.
And so that connection that these two guys made decades earlier became a source for helping him regain his freedom, but also the whole idea of reconciliation. And I think that was a great example of how he helped this gentleman out, and then this gentleman was able to pay it forward decades later that made a difference in his life.
On the subject, the other thing that bothers me a little bit about the effort to, remove history is just the fact that we have people in our country today that have no understanding of any of the players in history, right? During this whole tear down monuments movement, there were people who were defacing statues of Abraham Lincoln because they have no understanding of
the role,
right? And so, to me, this whole debate screams for more engagement, more education about our history so that people can appreciate it, understand it, and learn from it. And you don't achieve that by just shoving it off to the side. And so to me, that the whole issue of the flag, for instance, personally, I didn't have a problem with changing the flag. But I understood kind of the idea some of the people had with, I know I talked to some of our members who said, to me, it's more about, we're not really providing any choice. We're not providing any opportunity to bring people together. It was decided unilaterally by the legislature. And previously they had tried to give the citizens the right to vote on it.
Right.
And even the vote itself, right, was one option. It was basically yes or no. So again, I think it's a matter of educating people and getting out and talking about those things. And I think that was possibly a missed opportunity. But I agree with you. The only way we're going to get over these things is if we start educating and having conversations.
Right.
Otherwise we just kind of repeat the unlearned lessons of history.
Yeah, and this whole idea about the debate on this critical race theory, it's almost funny to me that it seemed to me to be something that I think a candidate in Virginia, I think is where it originated, latched on to it and never really defined what critical race theory is. And my understanding is that it's just a study of those things that have impacted the policies and procedures of the government in terms of how it handles the criminal justice system. That's what how did race impact the decisions about establishing our criminal justice system, and what impact does that have in our decision making and so forth. They got blown up to be, oh no, they're trying to destroy our history and rewrite history and tell us how mean and bad we were, and it makes us feel bad. And it's like a teachable moment got subverted into a political one-upsmanship, and it became a tool to just beat folks over the head with it. So again, another missed opportunity where we could have approached this and looked at a balanced discussion about our history. I do a radio show every Monday night, 7 o'clock, on a community radio station. And I start out every show with what's called Black Facts Today. And it looks at, okay, it's October 14th, and on this date, in 1791, this happened. On this date, in 1823, this happened. And the reason I do it is because folks can't find it elsewhere. It's not in our history books. It's significant things that have occurred in our community that have impacted America. And yet our side of the story is omitted from most history books. So when I hear folks say, "Oh, what little you are doing, we want you to quit doing that too," because we don't want that side of the story being told. And I think we're missing an opportunity to have that conversation and tell the whole story about our country.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the more we learn about history, the better. I think, from my perspective, you can't learn enough because it helps inform
the present.
Yeah,
and the future.
It tends to repeat itself.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because we don't learn enough from it. But I do agree with you that the more conversations we have,
Mm-hmm.
and the more we build relationships with the mindset of, how do we come together as human beings?
Right.
I was in Indianapolis a couple of years ago, and one of the first things I wanted to do after I ate at St. Elmo's Steakhouse was I wanted to go to the park where, on the night Martin Luther King was shot, right, Robert Kennedy flew into Indianapolis, and he was going to a rally in Indy at this park, and it was in a predominantly African American neighborhood, and they let him know when he landed that Dr. King was dead. And they said, nobody at this rally knows.
Oh, wow.
And they said,
I think I've seen a clip of that.
Yeah. So his wife goes to the hotel. He goes to the rally. He stands up on a flatbed truck.
That's right.
And he announces to the crowd that Martin Luther King was shot and killed. And he talks about how they were justified in feeling of outrage. Mm-hmm. And he said, I can only say that I understand in my own heart how it must feel, because I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. And he said, we've got to make an effort to understand in this country. Mm. And he went through it. And he said, so I ask you all to go home and say a prayer for Martin Luther King and his family, but more importantly, to say a prayer for our country.
Right.
And that night, that neighborhood was one of the only ones not to break out in riots that night. They went home peacefully. And it's because there was a relationship of trust. Mm-hmm. It's because he recognized the fact that we're all human beings, mm-hmm. and we all need to, at the end, work together to bring about the kind of change that we're seeking to create. But it was today at the park, there's a statue of, it's a pathway, and there's two walls, and peeled out from the walls are images of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King reaching towards each other. Mm-hmm. It was a really neat moment. But those are another example of ways that people can learn about history. Now, you've been, like you said, serving in the Senate for 32 years. And now you've announced you're running for mayor of Jackson. Talk a little bit about that. What's compelling you to do that now?
Well, it is like a calling. And I've made an attempt a couple of other times, and the city just wasn't ready for me. I think Jackson is ready now. I think they're ready for me. I think they're ready for change. I believe that they're ready for the kind of leadership that gets some things done. We're very stagnated in Jackson right now. I think everybody, and according to our polling, which we did that. That's different from previous years. Never did any polling before, but the polling looks really good. But in it, we also asked if folks thought that the city was going in the right direction or wrong direction. 56% of the folks say we're going in the wrong direction. Ask, okay, well, who's at fault? 7% says it's the mayor by himself. 8% says it's the city council all alone. And 85% says it's the mayor and the city council. So we got a leadership issue at the local level that extends not only to the mayor, but to the city council. And we need the kind of leadership that can bring people together and utilize all of the resources and talents that are available in our city. We're not doing that now. The city is very fragmented and segmented, and one gets the sense that I don't have a champion at City Hall for me. I don't have anyone who's looking after my own best interests. They're looking after self-interest, and we're seeing that being played out in some of the investigations that are going on right now. But you also see it played out in how the council deals with the mayor, how council members deal with each other, how the mayor deals with the council. And
the state, for that matter.
Well, that's a whole nother ballpark. But just in terms of their internecine dealings with one another, brother to brother, family to family, it's like there are 8 different agendas down there, and not one. We need one agenda, and that's Jackson's agenda. But if it's Councilman A, Councilman B, Councilman C, their focus, it appears more on their own individual agendas than in moving the city forward. So given our experience, our expertise, the relationships that we've got, I believe that John Horhn is the best choice for Jackson right now, because we need to put every oar in the water to paddle this boat back to shore. We're adrift right now. And if we're not careful, we will be flushing Jackson down the Pearl River. And we got to turn things around. And I think that our brand of leadership offers the best chance for Jackson to be able to do that, because I don't believe in one person having all the answers. I think it's got to be a shared effort. It's got to be a team effort. And there's got to be a focus on getting the job done and not just fussing and fighting.
Yeah, no, that sounds, I agree that you're talking about the need to have one vision, at City Hall. The other component is because Jackson's the capital city. Right. There has to be a bridge to be able to deal with the state, with the legislature, with the governor. And I think that's what people expect for a capital city.
Right.
Is the ability to.
The capital city and the state don't need to be at odds with one another. And that's the impression that people have, is that they're at odds with one another. And again, it goes back to trust. The legislature doesn't trust local government to a great extent. And it's not just this local government. It's happened before with other administrations, but it's worse now than it's ever been. So there's that, and then
why do you think that is? Do you think it's just is it because it's easier to solidify a political base by using rhetoric to hammer?
I think that's part of it. I think both sides play to their bases. The current incumbent mayor plays to his base all the time. I think the governor and members of the legislature play to their bases all the time, most of the time. And the other side of it is that um, uh, the legislature is in a "see, I told you so" mode. There was a lot of skepticism when the form of government changed in Jackson, and when African Americans, who were heavily the majority in the city, were finally able to vote in local elections. And then there began this tremendous disinvestment in Jackson, out migration. It started with the white community, but in the last 10 years, we've had more out migration by the black middle class than any other group. But the out migration started in the white community, and these communities, bedroom communities around Jackson, have grown and prospered at the expense of Jackson. And so the resources that Jackson once was able to count on, it can't count on anymore, because those resources, the folks who earned the most money, who were state workers, moved out of Jackson, and now it's um, uh, your workers who are on the lower end of the pay scale who have remained in Jackson. So the finances are not there. We've seen a major outmigration of professional services to Madison. So a lot of attorneys, CPAs, engineers have moved north. The retail, for the most part, has gone east into the Rankin County area. And so Jackson is left without a lot of resources, and you can get into a "see, I told you so" mode when you're not able to handle your services because you don't have enough money to cover it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that things are going to go to hell in a handbasket. But at the same time, the city has some culpability in the issue as well, because we have not always been good stewards of money that the state has provided to us, and because of this super Republican majority, that those phrase "power corrupts" and absolute power corrupts absolutely, I think is at play here. You got a supermajority in the House, a supermajority of Republicans in the Senate, and they can do anything they want without Democrats. Whereas if the numbers were better balanced, cooler heads might prevail, and rather than the state getting the posture of taking when they don't like something that's going on with Jackson, maybe we should get into the mode of cooperation and trying to reach compromise on some things and find out what's really the problem here. And if we have better communication and conversing with one another, we can get to the heart of matters and really try to get to solving stuff and not just creating more problems.
So if you get elected mayor,
When I get elected, man.
what do you view as the first most important thing you need to do?
Plan of action. We need a plan in this city.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had a working plan for the city of Jackson in a quarter of a century. And the old adage, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jackson is succeeding in spite of itself, and not because of. The Jackson is succeeding in spite of the local leadership, not because of the local leadership. So you find developers that get an idea and they'll just go ahead and work on it, but it's not something that is being led by the city fathers, city mothers. It's whatever success we're having are being done organically by individuals and small groups, but not being led by any plan that the city has, because it doesn't have a plan. So that's got to be the very first thing, is we've got to figure out where we're going and then work the plan. The other thing is almost simultaneous to that is we have got to clean Jackson up. There are parts of our city that look like they're part of the third world, that are embarrassing, demoralizing, disgusting, We've got more tax forfeited property than you can shake a stick at in this town. It's just sitting there deteriorating further. We've got a lot of blight and burnout structures that need to be cleared out. If they can't be saved, tear them down, but don't just let them sit there. And then the weeds and the litter. Nobody in their right mind could expect any credible investor to want to come into Jackson, to certain parts of West Jackson, South Jackson, Northwest Jackson, and look at that and want to be a part of it. So we've got to cosmetically improve that, but also we've got to put a plan to get together. And then the other thing is in that plan, every ward in the city needs to understand how it fits into the plan. You can't do a plan of action for just one segment of a community and expect things to remain balanced out. We've got an imbalance in Jackson right now, and a lot of that has to be addressed through proper planning.
So, with regard to the relationship with the state, do you feel that that's something that, given your experience in the legislature, given your time there, that's going to be an easier hurdle for you to get over because you've been in the Senate for so long that?
Yeah, well, no doubt about that. By virtue of the work that I've done over the last 30 some odd years, I've been able to generate, with the help of my colleagues, in excess of $1 billion in projects and resources for the capital city. The 1 cent sales tax is a good example of that. We were also able to put in the ground the convention center, the JSU Metro Parkway, the Civil Rights Museum, which is a $120 million project and the only state-supported civil rights museum in the U.S. So we've got a demonstrated record of what we've been able to do working with colleagues in often adverse situations. The votes are not necessarily with me all the time, but we have managed to find a way to be successful. And given that past experience and the relationships that we currently have, I think we'll see a night and day difference between the relationship between the capital city and the state.
Wonderful. Well, just as we kind of wrap up, I think one of the most important things of any person's life is their family, right? If you have your family behind you, well, no telling where you can't go.
I know where you're leading with this, right? Go ahead.
So just tell me a little bit about your family. I mean, I've had the privilege of meeting your wife, but tell me about that dynamic and how you feel.
Yeah. Well, Gail, my wife, and I have 2 beautiful children. We've been married for, gosh, how many years? How many years is it? It's kind of tricky because she don't like for me to say this, but we lived in sin for 3 years before we got married. So the number, I think about 40 years altogether that we've been together. Son who's finishing up his PhD and his dissertation for his PhD in world history. Daughter who's trying to finish up her dissertation and do an internship for her PhD in clinical psychology. And 2 very well-balanced kids. They don't look like either one's getting married anytime soon. That may be a source of concern for my wife and I, because I think I'm not that anxious to have grandchildren, but I think she wouldn't mind having the pitter-patter tiny feet running around. But neither of them. They're both focused on their careers right now, and so I don't see that in the offing anytime soon. My wife has a background in education. She has a specialist degree in library science, and she was the librarian at Callaway High School for 30 some odd years, and then went to Capital City Alternative for a few years. But she's fully retired now. Well, nobody would ever say that she was fully retired, but she's no longer working a career job right now. And on this mayor thing, the reason I chuckled is I thought you might have heard stories about the fact that she told me I better not run.
She definitely was leaning that way, asking you how she was feeling.
She stood with these voters in Jackson. That's what she had told me 7 years ago, which is the last time we took a stab at it. and yet she understands me, and like I said, this is more of a calling. My father, when we were growing up, as I might have mentioned a minute ago, would always say, when we complain, what are you going to do about it? And I know that there's some things I can do about it to help Jackson, and I will continue to offer myself up with the interest of trying to help the city. I don't, if when I get elected, I'll be losing money. This is not a financial incentive for me to do. I actually will lose money if when I take that job, but it's a calling, and so I was trying to figure out over the summer, how am I going to break this to her that, we're going to take another stab at it? And how can I convince her to get on board? She didn't want to hear anything about a poll. Poll looked great, but I don't want to see that poll. I don't need to look at that. And my daughter started working on her, and her sister, who's also my wife's sister, is a clinical psychologist, and she started working on her a little bit. But I think that as she was moving around, she started hearing from people saying, "Oh, I hear your husband thinking about running for mayor. Oh, I hear your husband going to be running for mayor. I'm so happy. Thank you for allowing him to do it, because I knew you didn't want him to do it." That sort of stuff. And so I think she started getting used to the idea before we had the talk. And so when we finally did have the talk, she says, "Well, what about this mayor thing? What are you talking about? What's going on here?" And I said, "Well, baby, we're going to do it." I said, "The polling looks good. The encouragement is out there. I think we can raise the money, blah, blah, blah. I think the timing is right now." And she said, "Okay."
You were geared up for a big conversation.
Who is this woman? Well, this is not my wife. And so it was the easiest conversation we've ever had about it. And we're in it. And I said in my press announcement, we had a press conference and had about 150 folks to show up. I think that buoyed her as well. 150, 175 people popped up at the announcement. A lot of it, electricity in the air and excitement. And in my statement, I said sometimes, we're all family here. But sometimes one part of the family has to stand up for the rest of the family. And that's what we're doing right now. We're standing up for the family because we don't believe in all the stories that you can write Jackson off. We're not ready to write Jackson off. We're ready to change Jackson for the better.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your time today. Like I
Thank you
said,
for the invitation.
I've always considered you a friend, and
Absolutely.
I know there are times we don't always see eye to eye on issues, but I've always appreciated the fact that we've always been able to talk through things. And
Exactly. And that's what friendship is all about.
that's right.
Yeah.
So thanks for being on it. I wish you all the best, and look forward to the next opportunity to visit with you.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.